It's hard to deny the incredible quality of games released this year. So far, 2017 has blessed gamers with huge heavy-hitting experiences like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Horizon Zero Dawn. The PS4 specifically has been privy to a wealth of awesome exclusives like Nier Automata, Yakuza 0, and Persona 5. One quick glance at our top 10 games of 2017 so far should be proof enough that the game industry is strong, healthy, and better than ever. Even more impressive is knowing that we're only halfway through 2017 and there's plenty of promising games landing this fall. Oh, our poor wallets. However, not every game has managed to exceed the hype. Anticipated sequels and new IPs sometimes don't always work out. More so because the quality of games this year is so high that means more effort from developers are required to make their games stick out above the rest. We've compiled a list of 10 games that didn't meet the standards gamers were looking for. Now, it's important to note that this list doesn't reflect the worst games of 2017 so far, but rather the ones that disappointed us the most. It's also worth mentioning that some of these titles even scored well with our reviewers, but isn't necessarily indicative of the staff as a whole. So, what are they? Let's find out. The original Outlast is one of the scariest games of all time, with a real sense of dread permeating from every inch of its spooky environments. Being trapped in an insane asylum is a predictable horror game trope, but Outlast made it work because of its night vision camera gimmick. It's a shame that its sequel falls hard on the horror sequel cliché, of opting in more for shock horror rather than psychological. Also, the focus on a crazy religious cult is a tired premise, and the villain, Papa Sullivan Noth, ventured dangerously close to being a cartoon. Outlast 2 offers up some good old jump scare antics, but its frustrating level design is probably the most frightening thing of all. For a game that is purposely covered in darkness, navigating through most of Outlast 2 is very frustrating due to a lack of direction. It's still worth a look for fans of the genre, but it's a disappointing follow-up. Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands is the latest Ubisoft game centered around open-world cooperative play hijinks. The Ghost Recon games that have come before are all about stealth and strategy while taking down your opponents without alerting anyone. Wildlands, while it does allow for these approaches, really just wants you and your buddies to get your hands dirty and make a big ol' mess doing so. The military shooter mechanics and huge open world are oftentimes at odds with one another, and sooner than later, it all becomes very repetitive. There's definitely some enjoyment to be had with Wildlands, but this is one franchise that didn't benefit from going open world. It appears to have paid off for Ubisoft in terms of sales, but we're hoping for a more traditional Ghost Recon experience next time. Another Ubisoft game failing to deliver on its promise? Well, yes and no. For Honor is one of the most interesting games to come out this year, mainly because it offers a unique and successful art of battle melee combat system that's both simple and difficult to master. The promise of one-on-one matches with both opponents reading one another's moves works extremely well. What doesn't work is practically everything else. From a bland single-player campaign and multiplayer modes that don't service the combat system sour the core fighting mechanics. The strategic and methodical combat turns into a rushed hack-and-slash experience the moment more than 2 players are on the battlefield. The different classes don't matter as much in 4-on-4 scenarios, which simply turn into nothing more than medieval chaos. Add in some technical issues and bugs at launch, and For Honor sadly falls under the disappointed column. You can tell that IllFonic, the dev team behind Friday the 13th the game, are huge fans of the films. The overall tone, sound design, and atmosphere are all spot on, and that's immediately recognizable to anyone that grew up watching the gory adventures of Jason. It's such a shame that the asymmetrical gameplay is super redundant and overwhelmingly glitchy. The concept of everyone working together to escape the map, while another player gets to go on a murderous rampage killing everyone else, is the perfect Friday the 13th scenario, but the gameplay is pretty one-sided. Playing as Jason is a total blast, but playing as one of the obnoxious teenagers isn't nearly as fun. In the end, there was a ton of focus on making the game feel like the films, but much of the gameplay could have benefited from a few more months of polish. A running theme throughout this list of games is that technical problems can outright ruin good gameplay. And Sniper Ghost Warrior 3, much of what it has to offer is pretty decent, but constant crashes and odd enemy collision keep the fun at a standstill. Sniping a far-off bad guy at incredible distances and seeing their head explode in slow motion never gets old. But this is the 3rd game in the series, and it doesn't really offer anything new. Ghost Warrior 3 likes to take existing ideas from other series like Far Cry and Sniper Elite and mashes them together in hopes of making a good game. But in reality, it doesn't excel at any one thing. Maybe we'll see some innovation in the next game. Ultra Street Fighter II: The Final Challengers is the 437th version of Capcom's classic Street Fighter II, but with a few extra bells and whistles thrown in to warrant a new release. Sadly, this version of the timeless fighter just isn't worth your time or money, because there are better versions out there like Super Street Fighter II HD Remix. Having the option to play with updated sprites is a cool addition, but throwing in 2 semi-new characters, a practically unplayable way of Hado mode, and repackaging it for Switch for $40 feels a little anti-consumer. Then there's the Switch controls, which just don't gel well with 2D fighters. The D-pad on either Joy-Con is unreliable, and playing with such tiny controllers makes for an uncomfortable fighting game. On paper, Yooka-Laylee sounds like a dream come true for anyone that grew up playing on the Nintendo 64. Created by ex-Rare developers who worked on Banjo-Kazooie, Yooka-Laylee is designed to be a spiritual successor to the Bird and Bear duo, and in many ways, it stays true to what made those games great. But just as nostalgia can trick the mind, Yooka-Laylee is also a stark reminder that some of those design choices and mechanics just don't work in 2017. Camera issues are still a problem, but even less forgivable than they were in the 90s, and it's a constant battle throughout the entire adventure, which puts a serious damper on the experience. Despite some nice visuals, some of the worlds aren't very interesting and seem unnecessarily large. It's not a complete train wreck some outlets may have you believe, but the entire package doesn't feel as polished as it could have been. It comes close to scratching that Banjo itch, but it's not nearly as satisfying. Development for Phantom Dust on Xbox One has been anything but simple. Originally announced at E3 2014 on Microsoft's stage, this new and refreshed version of a cult classic looked to be in the right hands of developer Darkside Game Studios. While no actual gameplay footage was ever shown, the announcement was a great way to show that Microsoft wasn't all about the Halos and Gears, and that it was thinking about the little guys too. Unfortunately, that didn't last, because due to monetary issues, Microsoft canceled the remake and shuttered the studio. The project was moved internally and finally saw the light of day in May, but it wasn't close to what was promised. The Phantom Dust that was released was as bare bones of a remaster one could get. Even with upscaled 1080p visuals, it still looked and played like an OG Xbox title. The core gameplay and mechanics remained the same as they did in 2004, which by the way haven't aged as gracefully in 2017. There are a few quality of life improvements, but certainly nothing to write home about. It felt phoned in and half-baked. A poor response from Microsoft to try and alleviate some of the concern from Xbox fans that they've been canceling too many games. Phantom Dust's only saving grace? Well, it was free. The Bomberman series tends to fly under the radar these days, with the last few games being released as digital versions only. So there was definitely some excitement from fans when Super Bomberman R was announced as being the first major retail Bomberman release in a long while. In the end, however, aside from having that new game box smell, Super Bomberman R still feels like a smaller digital title anyway. The new story mode is a nice addition, but it becomes quickly apparent that R doesn't really bring anything new to the table. It plays practically identical to the past Bomberman games, but it suffered from some nasty glitches and an unstable frame rate. While performance recently has been addressed from the developer with a new patch, the damage was already done.
Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything. And right now, I just want to know what happened with Alec.
Mass Effect Andromeda isn't a bad game. We even scored it highly in our launch review. But there's no beating around the bush. It underwhelms no matter how you looked at it. The original Mass Effect trilogy is adored for its character building, branching narrative paths, and dialogue choices while holding its own in the RPG and shooter categories. Despite the totally overblown negative reaction towards Mass Effect 3's finale, gaming has never seen a more ambitious space opera that spanned hundreds and hundreds of hours. So with that said, Andromeda was a victim of its hype. And well, sadly, it didn't come close to reaching it. Immediately out of the gate, Andromeda was criticized for its questionable facial animation, where it was picked apart on social media through GIFs and memes. It wasn't a good look for Andromeda because underneath all of that was a pretty great game. Since its release in March, BioWare has patched the game 5 times, improving its gameplay, squashing bugs, and yes, the facial acting. It's also been confirmed that new content will be added in the future, proving that Andromeda didn't have the smoothest development cycle. In fact, a breaking report from Kotaku in June revealed the game's troubled history, including a change in script writing and issues adapting to the Frostbite engine. Beyond that, Andromeda appears to have struggled in the sales department, falling short of its predecessors and other BioWare RPGs. It's had its price slashed numerous times at retailers as well as PSN and Xbox Live. Even at the time of this writing, Best Buy is giving it away for $20. Andromeda disappointed so much that all planned DLC have been canceled. It's clear that BioWare, and to an extent EA, wants to forget about Mass Effect Andromeda and may even shelf the series because of it. So that's our top 10 disappointing games of 2017 so far. Which ones have disappointed you the most, if any? Which ones are we wrong about? Be sure to let us know in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to COGconnected for all things gaming, and for news, reviews, features, and more, check us out online at COGconnected.com.